Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. The Daily Mail seems to be making a habit of picking fights with public figures. First, it got into a damaging scrap with Labour leader Ed Miliband about the politics of his father, Ralph Miliband. Currently, it's embroiled in an argument with Labour frontbencher Harriet Harman about her activities at the National Council for Civil Liberties in the 1970s. In the midst of all this, one of its columnists, Richard Littlejohn, launched a parody of Muslims as extremist bomb makers when it was revealed that a Muslim cleric was organising a family fun day at Legoland. Muslim organisations and others protested to the Mail editor, Paul Dacre, pointing out that although they might not agree with all that cleric Hatim al-Haddad had to say, they objected to Littlejohn's blanket condemnation of a whole community. But does Littlejohn have an inalienable right to express his opinions, or should there be limits on the kind of language that he and other journalists can use? With me in the studio is Brian Cathcart, the founder of the media watchdog Hacked Off, Dr. Mohammed Abdul Bari, political commentator, Jamal Harwood, head of the legal affairs at Hizb ut-Tahrir, and we're joined on the phone by Robin Richardson, co-author of Pointing the Finger, Islam, Muslims and the British Media. Welcome to the programme, everybody. Brian, this is, shall we say, a long-running story, the British treatment of Muslims now.
It is, and indeed the crass behaviour of the Daily Mail, as you say, a long-running story. I mean, you ask, is there an inalienable right? I think there probably is. I don't think you could frame a law to ban what Richard Littlejohn wrote that wouldn't catch a great deal of public debate in this country. Much though we would all applaud a special law just to ban Richard Littlejohn, perhaps. But I think, you know, what we have to do, and I think the Muslim community has responded, you know, admirably, is condemn it and show that it is crass and wrong. And I think also it might be worth asking the Daily Mail how many Muslims they have in their newsroom. Because my experience is that when there are Muslims in the newsroom, when there are minorities represented in newsrooms proportionately, you don't get this sort of crass misbehaviour, this sort of thuggery and bullying, because people recognise that this is a community and we live side by side, and they have to behave with some respect to their fellow citizens. And, you know, I think it wouldn't be happening in the Mail if they had a substantial, you know, a representative, a proportionate staff reflecting all the minorities they tend to abuse.
Jamal, do you think that's right? That basically there isn't a law that can stop this. It's a political battle to make sure that it's unacceptable when it happens.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. I think the big problem here is that you know, freedom of speech is not absolute, as we know. We have libel laws, we have other laws which you know, you just cannot speak out. Drawing that line has always been the problem, and where it should be is a question in terms of political accountability. This is what freedom of speech is really about, in terms of accounting our leaders, our politicians and so on. Not in a vilification manner, which they sometimes overstep the line as well, but this, you know, crass ridicule, vilifying a community, the worst gross stereotypes and exaggerations can only do damage, you know, to Muslim and non-Muslim relations in this country. You know, for a minority like the Muslim community to be subjected to this type of, you know, vehement, you know, attacks is very poor. And my biggest concern is I don't think it's just a question of law. Some people say, you know, there should be a law against racial incitement or religious incitement or what the boundaries of those laws are. I think the question is we don't see enough of political will, meaning within the establishment, within the senior politicians, within the heads of these media outlets against this type of thing. And I think until we saw any change there, I don't think sadly, we're not going to see change.
Well, Dr. Barry, do you think it's a question of what the kind of political response should be? I mean, after all, at the same time, half the political establishment seem to be calling on Harriet Harman to apologise for, well, something she didn't seem to have done in the 1970s, whereas there isn't really a public outcry saying, well, Richard Littlejohn should apologise for this.
Well, the political class in this country, unfortunately, in the last few years, haven't done quite well with the Muslim community. There are news after news. That's the matter of media. Okay, that's one thing. But with the prevent agenda and tackling extremism agenda, it's Muslims have been put under so much of pressure, and this is not helping as well. So someone like Richard Littlejohn comes up and write this parody or satire, and this is the climate that has been created, unfortunately. And Paul Decker has hidden behind this parody and satire. But what about the civility? Okay, legally probably we cannot do anything, but there's a civility in this civil society, and undermining a certain community which is already under pressure from many sectors isn't helpful, and is politically naive, uncivil in my opinion, and probably bordering on incitement to sort of hatred.
Robin, let me bring you into the discussion here. I mean, how deep-seated do you think this now is, this kind of behaviour by the British media?
Well, I think it's very deep-seated and it goes back a long way. There have been scapegoating of this kind and moral panics for a long time. It was getting better, frankly, until this outrageous and despicable article by Richard Littlejohn last week. I naively thought things were getting better, and they clearly aren't. What is striking about his piece is how clever it is. I think he cleverly stays within the law, but nevertheless he's overstepped various other boundaries and lines, I'm quite sure. So I think we do have to see this article as a clever example compared with some of the even more crass things in the past, but an example of something which has been going on for a long time and will continue to go on, alas, I suspect, though it'll get cleverer and more insidious and more subtle in the years ahead. But things have improved. There are very few papers who would do what the Mail did last week. In fact, there's only one other, I think, that is as bad.
Brian, do you think that's true? Do you think there's a general improvement and the Mail is kind of out on a limb here?
I think one of the things that's striking, and you drew attention to it, is how extreme the Mail is these days. I think, I'm not sure why it's happening, but it's clear that this is a paper that will will go to any lengths, as it were, to grab a headline and to attract public attention. The treatment of Ralph Miliband was deliberately, not only did they publish one article that was provocative, but they deliberately published it again to, as it were, double the provocation. And I think that sort of behaviour is, it's eccentric, and I think, the key thing is to be quite clear that this paper is doing it, and it's part of their policy to bully minorities and to try and bully people, through their dead fathers and so forth. To be quite clear about the approach that's being taken and to condemn the paper clearly. I think that's all we can do while at the same time maintaining our freedom of expression. Do
you think in any way the Mail is moving into a territory now that is kind of testing the post-Leveson environment? Is there something that post-Leveson ought to be happening here that isn't?
I don't think. This isn't really a Leveson issue. He wouldn't. The no code of practice, I think, would prevent people expressing opinions, which is essentially, although mad as it appears, that is essentially what Littlejohn is doing. So I don't think it comes under that umbrella. In general, the Daily Mail has never altered its behaviour in relation to, what happened before Leveson, during Leveson. We know that they continue to bully people, intrude on privacy, and so forth, right through Leveson, and indeed these things continue to happen now. The Daily Mail is the chief offender in the Press Complaints Commission by a long chalk.
That's very interesting. Well, in what terms? In what ways is it sort of out ahead in terms of press complaints?
They attract the most complaints. First of all, you've got to recognise the Press Complaints Commission is discredited, so many people just wouldn't take a complaint to them anymore. But in terms of the complaints they receive, even up to this month, last month, when the figures are available, they attract most complaints. And if you examine, the PCC's own figures, which they published very reluctantly, showed it comes out at the top of the league table of breaches of the code by their measure. We've done our own study, which shows that they're way ahead by our measure, which is much more generous in terms of the number of code breaches. So no matter how you look at it, we're looking at a paper which is something like twice as bad in these departments as any other.
So, I mean, everybody's been saying, there isn't really a legal redress here, but you mentioned the libel laws. I mean, is the Littlejohn article sort of moving towards the border where it might be libelous? Because, I mean, the form of it was a parody. But I must say, I mean, for viewers who haven't read it, it mentions a cleric, the cleric in question at the beginning. There's nothing in quotation marks actually said by this person in the article. It moves directly on without kind of signalling to the reader that there's a sort of parody is about to begin, so to say, of what purports to be a kind of the hour-by-hour events of the day, including leaving a coach outside with a bomb outside the House of Parliament. I mean, we must be teetering on being able to make a case, surely, that this is suggesting that this person might actually do that when it's complete fabrication.
I believe that various parties are examining that, and I agree. Sheikh Haytham al-Haddad has come in for particular attention in this vile piece. But I think there's a wider issue here, which is that there's a core stream to this argument. I mean, the Littlejohn piece is maybe the most extreme example of what we have. This is what people often term as Islamophobia. But we're talking about Muslims which are practicing their religion. Okay, Islam is a distinctive way of life and has certain rituals and aspects to it which Muslims perform. And for him to take this up is actually a direct attack on what we call practicing Muslims. And Sheikh Haytham al-Haddad is one of the leading Muslims in this country. And it's quite interesting that it's a specific attack on him because he's been associated with organisation of this Open Day, which has actually now been cancelled by Legoland. So that's part of their policy of the Daily Mail to cancel virtually any Islamic event. So the issue is that we're trying to polarize Muslims between the practicing, upright, those which are strong and adhering to their faith versus others which are being pushed into sort of, the liberal, secular viewpoint. And there's a big difference in this country. And there should not be a problem with Muslims, Jews, Christians, or people of other faith practicing their religion within the boundaries of what the society is about. And that's what Muslims are doing, in 99.9% of cases. So this direct attack is not on Sheikh Haytham al-Haddad, it's an attack against practicing Muslims and those which are adhering to Islamic values.
I mean, as I understand it, actually, the day out at Legoland hasn't actually been cancelled, which... here's a phrase we don't often use on current affairs. I mean, good for Legoland. But Dr. Barry, do you think that the laws against incitement to racial hatred might be used in a case like this, or would afford any kind of protection in a case like this?
Well, I'm not a legal expert, so this thing should be seen by the legal experts. But what I'm saying is dividing this community in this way. One is the internal division that Jamal has mentioned. The other one is it's just to portray the Muslim community as a whole and the religion of Islam as a whole in such a way that people think that it's vile and it's vile people that is practicing. But we are the people in this country. And what does it mean? That it is dividing people against another people. And is it for attention seeking? It's very difficult to say because the editor has defended. And just it's a spoof, it's a parody. So there is something going on behind this. And unless the whole society and all the communities come up and challenge this, it's not only just Muslims' job to challenge this. Because at the end of the day, it's about civil liberty, it's about civility, it's about community cohesion, and it's about our values that we really hold dear.
I mean, if I could just say, this spoof and parody, this is a very dangerous path to go down. We saw Nazi Germany vilifying and ridiculing Jews in the 30s you know, based on their religious practices, based upon being money lenders, even their appearance and this. So this can actually quite easily lead towards a path whereby communities can be ostracized and can be subject to widespread ridicule. And the Mail has a very wide readership, and this is the danger.
I mean, Robin, what do you think about that? Because, I mean, it's a valid point, isn't it? That, I mean, this wasn't, well, we could say it wasn't a very good parody. We could say that it was a kind of political comment that was really pretending to be parody but wasn't.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting question. I agree with what has been said, but there is a difference between, for example, Ed Miliband and the Muslim community. One could easily imagine an article like this, let us say about UKIP. It would be easy to collect cuttings and stories and anecdotes and imagery, but they wouldn't print that. But even if they did, the Mail wouldn't print it, but there are other papers who would do a spoof on UKIP or on the Tory party or on the Labour Party. But those are big people who can look after themselves. Compared with them, Muslims are very vulnerable. They get attacked on the streets. They get discriminated against in employment, in the production of services, the provision of services, and so on. Muslims are a vulnerable minority. And what can be done? Well, the law possibly can be invoked here, I think. Certainly the law on libel, I'm pretty sure. And so this may well be actionable.
OK, I'm going to have to leave it there, Robin, because we're just running out of time as we get to the break. But we will be continuing the discussion about this question after the ad, so do rejoin us.